I'm here with Dr. Jackson Crawford. Jackson, how you doing?
Doing good.
Thank you so much for being on the channel today. And we're going to talk about a lot of things, I think, but especially about Old Norse poetry. So let's learn about that together. I'm Luke, this is Jackson, and this is polýMATHY. So, Jackson, one of the things I love more than anything about Latin is the poetry. It just moves me. It gives me this connection to an ancient society that were there to people that were so much like us. So I really find that amazing. And I don't know, have you had similar experiences in your interest, your passion for Old Norse poetry?
Yeah. To me, I think that my interest in Old Norse poetry is an extension of my interest in poetry generally.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so often I think that the strictures of poetry, whatever they might be, and they might be very subtle in the case of something like free verse, force the poet to choose language more deliberately than one normally would, and to make strange connections, right? Words that rhyme that you would never otherwise think of as similar, words that alliterate that you would never otherwise think of in the same context, and make these phrases that can just echo in your mind for the rest of your life,
Mm.
I think about the way that something like Shakespeare or the King James Bible, whether or not people have read them or heard them performed, contribute all of these 2 and 3 and 4 word phrases that just bounce around like ping pong balls for centuries in English, just because they're so unusually put, but also so somehow almost musically beautiful.
Yeah. Anything that leaps to mind that really stirs you?
Well, in terms of just the phrases, I don't know if there's one that stirs me. I'm thinking about something like "She stoops to conquer."
Mm.
Right? It's a weird thing to say, but it sort of sticks in your mind. There's a dozen phrases that people use in just everyday English that come from somewhere in Macbeth.
Mm.
Right? I mean, everything from like "out damn spot" to insert. I don't know.
We'll ADR that later.
I wasn't prepared for this.
Yeah.
But every time that I read something like, Macbeth or Hamlet, because I recently read Hamlet, right? Because I was talking about this movie.
Right. Amloth?
Yeah, Amleth.
Amlothi or something.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, Amlothi is the Old Norse.
The Old Norse
Yeah,
one.
the true Old Norse name.
Yeah.
Amleth is the Latinized and then de-Latinized.
Mm. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I always think whenever I encounter Shakespeare or reading the King James Bible, there's so much here that shaped English. And it's because of that poetic clang, I think, to the language.
At some point, when we might wait till later, but I'm going to ask about a sort of Sapir-Whorf idea of how, of course, language in a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis shapes the way people think. And they're strong and weak versions of the argument. It's an idea which is attractive to a lot of people who get into languages with or without a strong linguistic background, because it's like, oh, wow, that would make a lot of sense to explain why these people think the way they do, or they could. But in a more abstract sort of way of just using the idea, what about a society or culture, whether literary or popular, the way we have, of course, our own modern culture and, say, English. And you're saying it's shaped partially by elements of Shakespeare and the King James Bible. Do these polýMATHY, these memes in the classic sense, have they had an impact, do you think, that shapes the way we think or perceive the world?
A couple things here. This is the most intellectual context in which I've ever heard memes referred to.
It is Greek.
It is, but still. Second, as far as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis goes, as you said, the strong and weak forms of it. I am like a sleepy time tea form of it, right?
A sleepy timed tea? I didn't follow that.
Well, if strong Sapir-Whorf is, espresso, I'm a...
Oh, drinking tea.
Yeah, I'm an herbal tea.
For some reason I thought letters.
No, I'm like an herbal tea. I'm that weak on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Okay.
I'm not saying that I don't think there's something there, but I don't think there's an espresso
I think
there.
that's, yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um,
Tend to agree, because a lot of people have used use it to justify so many things. Like I've heard anything from, for example, I remember speaking with a professor some years ago who adored poetry, ancient Latin poetry, or ancient, yeah, Latin poetry, ancient Greek poetry, those kinds of things. Mentioned how it's just the way they thought was better. This element of their culture was better than ours, and also the way the languages are, inherently better because of that. Because since the losing of a case system for her represented a kind of decadence,
right.
and this is a very common idea.
I mean, yeah, I've heard this sort of thing. Ironically, decadence means,
Casus case,
Yeah.
falling down all the cases.
I mean, to the original question, as I think I understood what you were asking, I think you can see very similar patterns in Old Norse poetry in terms of how it influences just how people used Old Norse. And it actually seems to have had to kind of back influenced a lot of culture too. So, for example, this is a little bit of a long detour.
Good.
But there's a tree, right? There's the famous mythical tree, Old Norse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually what we see it called is Oscar Yggdrasils.
Oscar
Yggdrasils.
Yggdrasils.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the ash tree of Yggdrasil,
Ah.
right? So sometimes, actually not very often, we see the tree just referred to as Yggdrasil.
That's what I've normally seen it in.
But that's
more
not-
superficial.
Not how
Yeah.
it's usually referred to. It's usually the ash tree of Yggdrasil.
So Frankenstein versus Frankenstein's monster.
A little bit, but then what's Yggdrasil, right? So Old Norse uses mostly alliterative poetry, right? Your 10 terrible trans sources on a Tuesday kind of thing. And so each god or each important hero or any important thing that you're going to talk about a lot in poetry, like sword or spear or corpse or whatever, because it's Old Norse poetry, there's a lot of that kind of thing, has all kinds of alternate names that allow you to refer to that thing while alliterating with completely unexpected words. So Odin, for example, has dozens, maybe hundreds of attested names. One of his names is Ygr, Y-G-G-R, which is something like the frightener. Makes sense. He's a frightening warlike figure. Okay, Drasil means horse. It's one of the poetic words for horse. The normal word is Hester. Drasil is a poetic word you can use if you want to relate it with a D. Or if you just want to be poetic. So Yggdrasil looks for all the world like the word means Odin horse. Not Odin's horse, notice. It's not possessive, but Odin horse. So altogether, the tree seems to be the ash tree of Odin horse. What's going on? Right? It's pretty strange. So the best explanation that I've heard about this is that Yggdrasil is, and this is Anatoly Lieberman at the University of Minnesota who proposed this particular interpretation. Yggdrasil actually does not originally refer to the tree, but to Odin and or his horse Sleipnir, maybe together as sort of a unit, or maybe it just refers to Sleipnir, but that the tree is associated with Odin and his horse because of Odin's sacrifice of himself to himself on it.
Right.
So, because we have this really elusive, spun out, 10 steps out there name for Odin and or his horse, that satisfies the requirements of some poet late in the Viking Age perhaps, we wind up with a name for a tree that we often say today that probably doesn't actually mean the name of the tree. It's probably the name of Odin or his horse. Anyway, my point is, it's probably not the original name of the tree. It's just some bit of poetry that's stuck in somebody's head.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we have those things all the time. That building of language in society and culture, in a popular culture, even if it's a very old or ancient one. And it allows a kind of shorthand as well. It's which is something we all have in common, where people can immediately find friendship with someone like, oh, you like that movie, I like that movie too. Or also to then make judgments about the character instantaneously, negative ones too, about person. Oh, you don't like that movie, or you like that movie, how can you like that? And then usually I think most people tend to be conscious of this, and they don't really feel ill will, or hopefully not put too much faith in a superficial connection with someone based on just like, oh, you also like that movie or that thing. But it does help.
There's something to be said for someone whose soul is spoken to by the same things that speak to yours, right?
Yeah.
I think that is a thing. Did you ever watch Breaking Bad?
Oh, yeah.
So you know the guy who plays Tuco?
Yeah.
So I've met him.
Have you really?
Huge Robinson Jeffers fan.
Really?
We met at a Robinson Jeffers conference.
No way.
Yeah, no shit.
Amazing.
No bleep, I don't know what.
Language is language.
Yeah, he and his girlfriend were at this Robinson Jeffers conference in Carmel, California, and I want to say 2013.
Wow. What was
14?
What was the keynote topic about?
I don't remember what the keynote was, but it was just, I was presenting on Jeffers' interpretation of the Volsungs, which he actually has a long narrative poem about the Volsungs. That was my personal talk. The actor who played Tuco, if I'm not misremembering his name, it's Raymond Cruz, was talking about an effort to film Jeffers' famous narrative poem. Well, Jeffers isn't famous. Famous within a very small community poem, Cador.
Wow.
He actually wanted to make a movie out of it, and he was there on behalf of that effort. Yeah.
It's amazing too how the impression that, he played that character so believably and frighteningly.
Oh yeah. Well, as a huge Breaking Bad fan who had seen that show multiple times, it's hard to shake that feeling that this guy's about to knife me in the guts. Right?
I think when you teach someone the meanings of meaning the relative pronoun one, I am the one who knocks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. I do sometimes actually use that, but I just keep expecting this guy to take a bump of meth off of his fist and then go tick or something, But very mild mannered guy, but also like there's this instant connection. Like, you're into this obscure poet. Wow. I mean, to me, not to get off of the Old Norse track that you were starting us on, but Jeffers speaks so much to me that I can quote Jeffers, for hours, actually. I'm much more effectively than I can Shakespeare.
Well, I'm not familiar with Jeffers. Could you
nobody knows anything about Robinson Jeffers?
Yeah.
No.
Could you introduce us now to anything you, maybe you can't remember any lines per se, but what can you characterize his work?
Yeah, so Robinson Jeffers, I want to say 1887 to 1962. California poet, built a house for himself and his wife in Carmel, California before anybody was there, basically. The house is still there. I'm a member of the Robinson Jeffers Foundation that helps keep the house there because it's in the middle of a suburban neighborhood now. It's threatened all the time by development and different plans. But he, people who do know him often misunderstand him and take him as very misanthropic. But he's not misanthropic. He has if you understand him well, I think, it's that he has, well, as he says, he has one of his poems, he does incredible descriptions of these Western landscapes. I can't remember the entire thing for you, but he concludes it after this beautiful landscape description with, love that, not man apart from that. And that's what it is. It's not misanthropy. It's more of a sense of humanity as integrated into the natural world, if that if I'm communicating that half well.
Say it again. Love that, but
Love that, not man apart from that.
As opposed to what is man apart from the thing he's referring to?
He doesn't see nature and humankind as being two different
Mm-hmm.
things that have to be opposed. Rather, he sees humankind as being happiest when somewhat integrated into the natural world. He's not misanthropic. He doesn't like life in the cities where humankind is separated from that. But he's also not a human hater, right? He's not one of these. That's a perspective you see on the internet sometimes. It's really not like that. It's love that, including the human part of it.
What was the author and the thing of Arch's National?
Edward Abbey.
Edward Abbey.
So actually, Edward Abbey is how I learned about Robinson Jeffers.
Ah, okay.
Edward Abbey quotes him in Desert Solitaire. That's actually the first encounter I had with Robinson.
That's right, Desert Solitaire. Yeah, that kind of veneration of a landscape such as this one, with the pristine mountains
But it's not misanthropic, and reading it that way is misunderstanding it. He's not a human hater, and it's so facile and easy to label people like that way, just because he hates cities.
That's understandable.
And it has
I can see why people would not like them.
Yeah, well, and then he has a very pointed tongue, and often deals in human follies, but of course, at the same time, admits that he himself is subject to the same follies. Right? It's not a hateful attitude. It's a very understanding, somewhat cynical attitude. More skeptical than cynical, I would say. It's actually a lot like Hávamál. The words of the High One in Old Norse. Boy, this is wandering afield.
Well, but you just brought it back with the Hávamál. Thank you, very good. So the wait, I actually had a question. Mal, is that cognate with like mova, meaning language in Slavic languages?
I doubt it. It's actually the same word as English meal.
Oh, maybe not.
Yeah. It's Proto-Germanic mathla.
Oh yeah, it's very unlikely then.
Yeah.
Mathla.
I believe it's mathla in Gothic. So,
okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's got in with it, the Slavic term.
Well, the Hávamál is a poem, and you feel a lot of affinity towards it. You translated it, and this is a little reminder myself to put a little thing to the book.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, yeah. But
you can just cover me with it. Just leave that on for the rest of it.
Yeah, that's one of those transitions on your basis.
Just have it like pan over me.
We could do that.
Okay.
I'll talk to my editor. So why does that work then? Move you?
Oh man, Hávamál is it's a bag of snakes in terms of just all the different topics that I could follow. So what Hávamál is, for anyone who's not familiar with it, it is preserved as part of what we call the compilation, the Poetic Edda. This is about 30. When I say about 30, it's not because I don't know how many, it's because people disagree about where the boundaries are. About 30 poems in Old Norse that concern the Norse gods and heroes, preserved in a manuscript written down in Iceland in about AD 1270, but linguistically datable to many centuries earlier. 2 or 2.5 centuries earlier. So Hávamál is the longest poem in the Poetic Edda, and it's 163 stanzas. Probably was not originally composed as one poem. It's probably 5 or 6 poems put together, but all of its constituent parts share an emphasis on the wisdom of Odin. So the most famous part of it is the first 80 or so stanzas. Again, people just disagree about where these boundaries are, which discuss practical wisdom for everyday life. And Odin is, he's a skeptic, just about everything. You gotta show Odin, right? He's like the old Missouri motto, show me. It also walks this line that I think sometimes people read as cynical, but I don't read as cynical. I distinguish skeptical from cynical. Right? And also, it's not an excoriation of the faults of awful human beings. It's an admission of the faults shared by human beings, including the speaker, who is only kind of ambiguously Odin for a lot of that practical wisdom section. But then the Norse gods are very human, so actually using the term human characteristic is not too untrue of the Norse gods.
Interesting. So that's the wisdom that is, although characterized often as being cynical, is merely skeptical. And why does that speak to you?
Well, partially because it sounds to me so much like my grandfather. It's the kind of advice he gave me. You know, he was nobody's fool and didn't want me to be. And, you know, he walked this fine line that is so hard to find. Why does it sound like I'm composing a song? Where he took a lot of joy in life, but he also was never taken for a fool. Right? He wanted firm contracts, right? He knew people would try to screw him. But he wasn't this misanthropic figure, you know what I mean? It's so hard to walk this line.
He wasn't resentful, perhaps.
No, exactly right. There's no bitterness there. You know, he took each day as it came. He loved, you know, this place. Heck, this was practically our backyard when I was a kid. This whole part. And just, you know, any given day, something was making him happy. But you also never saw him fooled as to anything, as to buying anything, whether it be ideas or property. And it's just such a hard balance to strike, I think, sometimes. And so when I first encountered Hávamál and encountered its sense of humor, which I would call, this may not make sense initially, gently belittling. It reminded me a lot of him. So there's a stanza in Hávamál that says that cattle know when it's time to stop eating the grass and go home, but an unwise man eats until he harms himself. Well, this is sort of gently belittling. It's not saying, you idiot, stop eating so much, right? It's like, come on, even cows know when it's time to stop eating, right? That kind of backhanded, almost insulting you, but not really directly insulting you, reminded me a lot of his sense of humor, and I think actually comes across in a lot of traditional Western literature.
Yeah,
it's very similar humor to what you'd see in like a movie like Tombstone.
Right.
And actually, for that matter, very similar to the humor in a lot of Old Norse sagas. And I think that to a certain degree, there's commonalities between Norse literary tropes and structures and those of traditional Western literature. One thing I think about is the kenning, right? So, of course, in Norse poetry, kennings are indirect metaphors typically used to get around the structure of the poetry, right? I want to talk about a ship, right? Say I'm just doing this in English, but I don't have anything in my line that alliterates with sh. So what am I going to say instead of ship? Well, I might say a ship is a form of transportation, so is a horse. And I've got something that'll alliterate with H, so I'll call it a horse. But then to show you that what I really mean is the ship, I'm going to use some modifier that tells you that it's really ship. So I'll say it's the shore horse.
Shore horse.
Something like that.
I like that.
Or it's the wave horse, right? If I want to avoid alliterating with sh.
Would you say that the Odin horse, is that from
It's probably a kenning.
A kenning?
Yeah. Of course, what it's a kenning for then is maybe unclear.
I find that really interesting that you're going to have these kennings, these memes that are preserved in the literature, but because of...
By the way, one potential explanation for that is that the horse is the tree because he hung from the tree, so he rode it.
Right.
Right, so it's Odin's horse for that reason. Yeah.
I remember you giving that explanation, I think, once.
Which is kind of
persuasive.
Kind of dark humor.
Yeah.
Right, he rode it. Right, but by the way, those kennings are also fairly common in at least Western humor writing, which is actually a big part of Western, like Kappa poetry and stuff. Right, smoke wagon for gun, right, specifically in Tombstone. Iron horse, which is actually originally by the way, a humorism. Sometimes it's attributed like seriously to American Indian English, but I don't think it was ever actually
Really?
a big part of it. I think that was actually originally a humorism. The Iron Horse.
The Iron
Which
Horse.
is a Kenning.
Interesting.
Although, by
Yeah.
the way, some American Indian languages do have names for horse that are sort of Kenningish, because a horse is a fairly late introduction to Plains cultures, right?
Right.
So I want to say that in Lakota, horse is something dog. Right? It's like tall dog or something like that. So, you know, languages repurpose other words. Boy, we're wandering afield. I mean,
This is exactly what I wanted to talk about. So,
wheel is a great example. Even like that goes back to Proto-Indo-European.
oh right,
Because it's in Proto-Indo-European, it's quick,
quick way.
right? So it's reduplicated. It's the turn,
Right.
right? Which makes sense, right?
That's amazing.
It's still kind of a newish word in Proto-Indo-European.
Wow. And is that the same word that gives rota in Latin, or is it?
No, it's a different root. There's two roots for wheel. Probably one is, you know, the outer wheel, and one is the inner part by the axle or something like that. But there are two roots. So German and Latin have the R root, and then Germanic, English wheel, Old Norse hill, Greek kuklos, Sanskrit chakra. Those are all from queklos, and those are, by the way, all regular developments from queklos. Just a lot of different sound changes in those languages.
Fascinating. Yeah, no, those were all the things I was trying to talk about.
Random stuff with Jackson Crawford.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly coherent.
We didn't prepare this.
On the yeah,
You can cut me saying that if you want.
this is exactly what I want to talk about, because the how language affects us, how we think, how we perceive the world, and that'll be the next step I want to take it with you specifically, how your familiarity, your having read all these things, which not a lot of people read, if they're, say, speakers of various Western European languages, or, you know, very few people read, unless they're maybe Icelanders, they don't read a whole lot of things in Old Norse, and they're not necessarily absorbing their either sense of humor or their sense of wisdom. Like when I read things about Greek and Roman mythology, it's usually just so bafflingly bizarre and unfamiliar. Like, you could see things that make sense, but the consequences that happen to characters, it's like, what is the advice exactly, if any, in the myth of Actaeon, for example, which has been told differently.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
or, you know, actually, this comes to a point that I was thinking about after I recently saw that movie, The Northman. So part of what that movie has been praised for in certain circles is its hyper accuracy, which is pretty debatable. But there's this notion that it's kind of
Hyper accuracy?
yeah, I know. But there's this notion that it's kind of trying to inhabit a 9th or 10th century moral world instead of a 21st century moral world.
That's interesting. That's difficult when your audience doesn't necessarily share that belief
Yeah,
system.
very difficult. Very difficult. I'm not sure it totally succeeds. It tries. It certainly is trying.
How does it do that?
Well, I mean, you know, the hero is part of a group of people who burn a bunch of women and children inside of a house.
Oh, God.
But, you know, I mean, okay, to Vikings, that's perhaps not so extreme. Well, it's still pretty bad even for Vikings, I would say. Anyway, but to me, I thought to myself, okay, we're trying to establish right away that we're not living in this 21st century moral world. In fact, we have a hard time getting how different cultures think about things beyond those different measures of violence, or sometimes different measures of spookiness, right? You listen to popular podcasts, or watch popular movies, look at popular websites, and a lot of times the stuff that really sticks with people about another culture is something like, is something violent or something spooky. Okay, right. They're monsters, or they're violent myths, or violent heroes, right? That's what people know about Norse stuff, right? They know about Vikings, they know about Odin, they know about Thor, maybe, as kind of like spooky gods in the distance. I'm not expressing myself well. Here's let me come at this from the other end. Here is an actual 9th or 10th century moral universe. In Egil Saga Skallagrimssonar, one of the great Old Norse sagas, we follow the full career from childhood to old age of a man named Egil Skallagrimsson, who is a horrible person. He's actually also a horrible person in the definition of his own time, by the way.
Right.
Like, he's not a hero then that we interpret as a villain now. Like,
An anti-hero, perhaps.
yeah, he's kind of an anti-hero for them and probably closer to anti-villain for us.
Okay.
So, all right, but he still has powerful moral constraints that are put on him by the world in which he lives. So there's a scene, he's been raiding in the Baltic, somewhere around Latvia, Lithuania, and he's actually been captured. So sometimes this presumably happened. Vikings would get captured by the people they were preying upon. So he's locked up in the house of these Lithuanians, let's say, and the Lithuanians are partying away in another house celebrating their victory of the Vikings. Well, he manages to, classic action movie hero style, like bite his way through his bonds, right? Frees a bunch of other Vikings who are kept there. They steal some of their weapons back that are kept in another place, and they start heading to the ocean to see if they can find some Vikings to hitchhike back to Scandinavia with. And along the way, Egil, who's carrying this huge treasure chest that he's stolen from the Lithuanians, drops it and says, I feel terrible about what I'm doing. I can't keep going. Go on without me. I've got to make this right. And he goes back, barricades the Lithuanians inside the house that they're partying in, sets it on fire, and then shouts, this is what he was feeling bad about, my name is Egil Skallagrimsson, and I'm the one who's robbed you and killed you. Like, he felt terrible that he hadn't claimed it.
Right.
Right? That, to me, is genuine, weird, bizarrely another culture. Right? No one would think about that in a 21st century concept. It's not about the violence. Like, it's almost incidental. It's like, I better kill them. But they ought to know who I was.
Right. You're saying that an act like that would be considered not positive.
It's
but
not
also
great. It's not great that he's
even for them,
burning people inside, because you're not giving anyone a chance to fight back. You're not really being a dringer about it, right?
Exactly.
He didn't need to kill them.
And they didn't offend his family or something.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, they did take him prisoner, but it's that he's so concerned that they don't know who I am.
Right.
Right. That's true. That's truly something of another culture that you couldn't write in. And I feel like trying to create these stories about Vikings so often our sort of substitute for getting into their head is, oh, look, they're more violent than we are, which isn't really true. Ultimately, maybe violent in different contexts, violent with different levels of acceptance of said violence, and especially who you're practicing it against.
Right.
Or, they believe some spooky things, right? Ooh, here's a spooky myth about Odin hanging himself, which, we know from about 2 stanzas in Old Norse. It's actually not one of the myths they focused on.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, how one could look at any, traditional things that happen in religion where there's death or something, and, it's the center of the religion, but looked at without having been imbued in that culture, like, wow, that's kind of weird. And then, so that, and especially since our sources, as you've often said in your videos, are from Christian or Christianized authors who are writing down what they remember of the stories before they're forgotten completely. It's Christian. It's very different.
It's Christian Inc., right? I think that it's important to emphasize that the 19th century probably overemphasized how faithful these records were to some putative or Germanic mythos. But the 21st century internet probably overemphasizes the corrupting hand of the church. Right? We owe the Catholic Church a lot for how much these clerics did preserve of the ancient and medieval world that wasn't part of their own worldview. If you have made the decision that you're going to record a story from has been passed down for a couple hundred centuries by old people in your culture, it's you've already decided that you're not passing down something that's Christian, right? I don't see the argument for screwing with it.
Well, especially with everything we have preserved that's Latin and Greek, is transcribed by the same.
That's also Christian Inc. right?
Exactly.
And
And all kinds of things are preserved where I'm shocked that, like Virgil's eclogues. The fourth one is used as
Catullus.
exactly.
All right.
Yeah. The fourth one, which was considered by medieval authors for a long time, even before that as well, to be some kind of prophecy for the Christ child, is it's I suppose it's fine to, if one is speaking of miracles, then it goes beyond the cause and effect and so forth. So that I would put that apart. But it's not about that because he lived before his existence. So it's clearly not about that. It was about something else. But that's why Virgil got preserved, and so he got. But the eclogue, the second eclogue, is also amazing and beautiful. But it's about this guy who's really loves this young man, and that's what and that it's an unrequited love too, and it's not something that I would expect to be a part of a literary canon when I know those things until more recently in culture simply just weren't accepted by people to read about or to study. I find it interesting too because sometimes when you look in these old dictionaries, the best ones are like from the 19th century. Like
I know where this is going.
Like Lewis and Shore just just like you look up you try to look up a word that's in Catullus or something, and it might be some kind of obscene term, part of the everyday language of the ancient Romans, and obviously we in every language have similar terms, but the dictionary will just translate it as an obscenity. It's just this, and it's like frustrating because if people are just like, oh, I want to know all the dirty words in language, okay, that's a little silly. But when we really want to understand what the author intends by something, we could miss a huge part of what they're doing, or even the artistry of how they're doing it.
Well, and in the 19th century Old Norse dictionaries, typically the obscene words are translated into Latin.
Oh, good. Well, that'd be fine.
Because gentlemen know Latin.
Oh, it's with the Greek ones too. It's an ancient Greek dictionary for English speakers, but it just has the Latin swear word instead, and it's like, oh, good. At least I know what it is.
Yep. Because gentlemen know Latin, right? This won't fall into low hands.
Right.
It'd be misused.
It's interesting too. What do you think of the idea of certain forms of knowledge? Latin and Greek is one of those, maybe, where there exists still a notion, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but the idea of the languages being associated with elitism, and this could be applied for other even more esoteric things, say study of Old Norse, which isn't necessarily something that a lot of people do. So thankfully with the internet and with all the things that have been available to me, I've never once felt an experience of, there are these what's the term, gatekeepers who want to try to keep knowledge from me, and like we try to do in our channels, and we try to say, here's what we know, and we want to do the opposite of that. But I don't know, is there that kind of stigma in the Old Norse literary or studies realm at all? Or maybe there existed at one point?
In a lot of departments, there's a strong resistance to engaging with the public very much because of a dislike of the public in question. Right? So some of this has to do with, honestly, I think there's a vast misperception about how many of the people out there in let's say the ungraduate schooled public are just out and out white supremacists. I think those people are really loud on the internet. And I'm not downplaying their existence as someone who's been straight up threatened by people in these groups. But I don't think there's actually very many of them. And I think that most people's interest in this stuff is a lot more innocent than the graduate schooled elite assumes. And that saying, oh, I'm not going to put a translation of this out there that some Nazi could find. What you're doing when you do that is making sure there's no good translation that a normal person can find, and you're making them, if, say, some weird Nazi pseudo-intellectual does put out a translation, you're making that the one that is available.
Wow.
Right? That's a specific situation that I've encountered. It's like...
I can't believe that people not just you, but other people have had to premeditate thinking about, should I publish this translation about, it's just an ancient language, maybe poetry, that's going to be misused by Nazi pseudo-intellectuals.
And the thing
how
is,
unfortunate. How that's an oppressive consideration you have to take into account.
It is, and it actually doesn't oppress me that much because, like I said, I think that this is actually a very small minority. They're very loud on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And I don't confuse that for populace in the real world.
Yeah.
They're certainly not very influential in the real world. But there's a lot of people who are really curious about this and seeding the field of popular outreach because you're afraid there's Nazis out there, guarantees that it's the most vocal people who will talk to the public, who sometimes are those frickin' Nazis, who will do the public outreach, right? When real qualified people don't do public outreach, it's not that there's no public outreach, it's that the public outreach is by crazy people.
Right.
Right, which is something I encounter all the time in Old Norse studies.
Or people who are more, I guess, in fact, this is talking to the people or leading the people, demagogos, like kind of Greek ideas, kind of in my head as you talk about it. People can find the really excellent sources and understand the true meaning of something, or what at least scholars would say that we're pretty sure this is what this means or something, and not get something that's been bastardized by someone who has a very specific political agenda. But that's difficult because if people, we have to continue to, like we're talking about today, about communication. Like Carl Sagan, who was such a great communicator. We have to learn from that because
what was I telling you at lunch was how you read The Demon-Haunted World by Carl Sagan, and he talks about encountering people who have all kinds of crazy pseudoscientific ideas, and he doesn't scorn them. He doesn't laugh, dismissively about the proletariat and their idiotic ideas and say, ha ha ha, but we up here in the tower are quite superior.
Enjoying cookies, I see.
He says, I don't know why I did that gesture, but he says, I have compassion for these people because they want to learn.
Right.
That pseudoscientific crap that fills that person's head is the byproduct of a strong will to learn, a fascination with the world.
Which a lot of people have. Yeah.
And it got misdirected.
That's good.
What that means is that the raw interest is out there. We need to be the ones who are there to meet it.
That's right.
Right? It's a failure on the part of the elites, and I'm not really that elite unless you consider me having a PhD. Elite, well, maybe, I don't know.
Well,
the thing is, I guess I have qualifications to be part of this elite. I've certainly done some of these elite jobs. I taught at Berkeley or whatever, right? But I'm trying to think of a non-profane way of saying this.
You do it in Latin.
I don't worship myself.
There you go. That's clear.
I mean, regardless of the fact that I talk on a YouTube channel, right? So I can't be the shyest person in the world. But I don't have this notion that I understand this because I'm one of the smart ones. No, I'm one of the people who was curious about this, who came from a background that had nothing to do with this, had not that much good access to this material.
And you found it.
But found it. And now I want to make sure that other people are finding this stuff too. And they don't have to think that I'm the greatest thing in the world. I don't care.
Right.
That it's not about me. It's here I'm offering you a translation, like it or don't like it.
Right.
This other one's available, but here's one that perhaps will reach some people that weren't reached by a previous one. And at least I can make you the promise that I'm not trying to convert you to some weird, ideology.
It's so interesting.
I don't care what your ideology is.
Yeah.
Read my book.
It's a shame too, because it's just not something that I'm just so grateful for all the people who like to watch these videos, where I like to talk about things that interest me. A lot of it is Latin and ancient and Greek stuff and other languages. And when it comes to ancient languages, dead languages like ancient Greek, like Latin, like Old Norse, or unlike Old Norse, I don't know. Maybe put right in the comments. So Jackson's
The two people still watching this. I'm still waiting for what you're going to title this. Random shit with Jackson Carter.
Yes, and and no, because so you have to deal with people who are trying to use what they know little or quote unquote much, what they know about Norse mythology.
Quote unquote much is the biggest problem.
That's the Dunning-Kruger effect for sure.
Yeah.
That I think we've all experienced at some point, and then we realized, oh, we didn't know how much we didn't know yet. And then people utilize this for some kind of political agenda. I'm not relate. I've never really read anything by such people, other than I remember some things that like Hitler was after, and when it came to artifacts and the myth of the Aryan race, all these kinds of things.
It goes way past Hitler. I mean, it's these 19th century romantic shading into ethno-nationalist,
like Wagnerian kind of.
Yeah, Wagner's a part of it. But there's also these, like, I don't know what to call them, but witches. I forget the woman's name. Blavatsky. You ever heard of Madame Blavatsky?
That name's very familiar.
Pretty big 19th century mystic, woo, crystal magic, all that crap. She actually is a huge. People don't even necessarily know that it's her, but her ideas about runes and the Norse gods and such hugely influenced not only Hitler, but a lot of the esoteric writers who didn't influence Hitler, but nonetheless influence a lot of.
Like the notion that runes are magical.
That kind of thing, yeah. Well, and a lot of the specific ideas go back to her.
That's interesting.
And Hitler was a fan of her stuff, and I'm not a Godwin's Law guy. I'm not gonna say.
What's Godwin's Law?
If you've never heard of that,
maybe maybe I have. I don't recognize.
I mean, I believe in it, but I'm not a person who tries to make it come to pass. Godwin's Law,
like a Murphy's Law sort of thing.
No, Godwin's Law states that as any conversation on the internet continues, the chance of someone being compared to Hitler approaches 1, or the probability of someone being compared to Hitler approaches 1.
Is there an asymptote there?
Yeah, I'm not comparing anybody to Hitler. Like those analogies are way overdone. But there are people who call themselves Nazis.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's what's so shocking, is that you're not just saying that these people are maybe radical in some way, which is offensive in a way similar to what you're reading about Hitler is offensive. They're literally Nazis, or they describe themselves as such.
Exactly. This isn't me taking somebody who's like, to the right of whatever arbitrary point on the political compass and saying those are Nazis. This is me talking about people who call themselves Nazis.
Right. Yeah.
People. Anyway, they're out there. Like I said, I actually don't think there's very many of them.
Yeah.
I've told you about some of my own encounters here. I'm not downplaying, again, the existence of these groups. I do, however, downplay their influence and their numbers.
Yeah. Well, and the right thing to do is just to keep doing certainly what you're doing, which is to put out all of the correct, best research information on the subject that you can get your hands on.
And if I start every video by saying this doesn't belong to the Nazis, I'm the one putting it in people's head that it does. Right?
No,
because
it's important to know about this too, because the Norse stuff, at least to the same extent as greco-roman mythology, has been utilized in, say, Marvel. It's been utilized in popular culture. Vikings, Northmen. We could
lots of music,
all kinds of things that's interesting. And insofar as it becomes pernicious or violent or truly dangerous in some way, that can be seen as startling and terrifying and weird. And I'm not really familiar with anybody who's trying something similar in the Greco-Roman things. There are some people who have been trying to not just do reenactments, but actually to reignite like Roman religion, evidently.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to have taken off the same way that the Norse
one
has, and I don't know why exactly.
That's a good question.
I'm not sure what it is. I think if anything, I'll offer you this is all on the fly, so here's an even more on the fly hypothesis. I think that Norse myth, because it's not something that you typically encounter in school, has more of a cool factor than Greek or Roman myth, which you might well have encountered.
That's right, and it's so part of the literature, like meaning and how it's utilized. Like Hades is synonymous with hell, right?
Yeah.
So and those are from different. Actually, both of those words are from different pagan religions.
Yeah, right. Well, 'cause
Um,
hell comes from my side of the equation.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think, anything that you might have first been introduced to by your parents reading you cutesy little books, right? Which,
I love your first Greek mythology book.
Yeah.
There's gold and blue on the cover. The Apollo, I think, on the cover. Yeah.
I think that, frustrated 18-year-olds don't tend to turn to that.
No.
Instead, I think part of what, this opinion is not popular among some of these quarters, but I think part of what draws people to that Norse mythos is that so many of the most emotionally impactful movies that people have seen draw on that and try to recreate a world that's very Norsey, especially Lord of the Rings. I think that the huge upsurge in interest in Norse stuff is directly traceable to the Lord of the Rings movies right around the turn of the millennium.
That's very interesting.
Because people see those movies get wrapped up, get enraptured in this world, the mystique of it, and say, where can I get more of that? And the Norse sagas and Eddas are a place where you can get more of that.
Yeah, the more I learn about either Lord of the Rings and the influences on Tolkien, or about Norse mythology, while there are elements of inspiration that he clearly had, Tolkien, it's not distinctly Viking-ish.
No, not really.
It strikes me as just so uniquely a part of the Tolkien's world that I see them. I remember when I used to feel like they were similar too, like there's an Allfather in the Silmarillion or something, but
there's a tone that's a little similar, I think, in the sense, and in Tolkien it's deliberate, and in Norse myth I think it might be more accidental, that there's way more beyond the borders here, right? In Norse myth I think it's just an effect of how little is preserved, right? You get some god or hero or dwarf or whatever mentioned and you never hear about him again. It's like there's a story there, and there probably was, but there's that mystique that's like you can kind of imagine, right, what's beyond the mist.
Yeah.
And Tolkien sets that up deliberately, right? He refers to all these stories, which he's actually written somewhere on a napkin that Christopher Tolkien has published by now, but he's suggesting to you that wider world that's all fleshed out, but kind of letting you imagine what's beyond the mist. I think that's a big part of that appeal.
That is interesting. Well, heck, mystery, and that's a big part of it too, because we have a really strong sense of all the things that happened in ancient Roman history and ancient Greek history. It's so well studied and well known, and there's plenty of things we don't know, which that stuff at the border, it's harder to get there though, because it's so easy to, like, if one goes to the 5th century BC in Greece or the 1st century BC in Rome, so it's been studied to death. A lot of death that happens in both of those centuries too, which has captivated people for a long time. So it's so well known, there is a lot that's preserved, that getting to the border of, we just don't know what's there. That might be something that drives me to my own somewhat quixotic pursuit of reconstruction of ancient phonology in certain centuries and so forth, because there's so much accuracy that we can get there, and a lot we can say this is with a high level of certainty. There should be certain things that are, I don't know, it's like the retracted S instead of S. We would expect sh to be the S, the sibilant sound, and say ancient Greek, as is in modern Greek, as well as ancient Latin. Certain things like that. But there's so many other things too, like we've even talked about, which it looks like, it could be this, and and whether or not I'm successful, or other people are successful in that, is of course so a matter of debate. But the fact that it's intriguing because it is at the edge of knowledge and of mystery, and that's an interesting.
Yeah, we all want. Like, the thing is, as much as we want all the answers, we also love the process of being mystified. I just heard a hummingbird. It's the first one I've heard all year. Huh?
Oh, sorry, I said it in Italian. Colibri.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the name in most European languages.
Is it?
Yeah, it's from the same word as Carib in, like, Caribbean, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that happen? It's a North American,
it's
or America's bird, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's only in the New World. I think it's actually from a Caribbean language, but I think it's the same word as in Carib.
That's
Carib,
cool.
Carib, yeah.
That's neat. Yeah.
Apropos of nothing.
Fierce Little Warrior, what is it? I can never remember this great line that you...
Oh, I composed a poem about hummingbirds a long time ago that I quote a lot, but in Eastern Shoshone, the hummingbird is domo yagaid. The pealing thunder, because the way their wings sound.
Oh, they're terrifying, especially if you are sitting near the feeder, they're going to attack you, so they make sure you're out of the way before they go to the feeder. They want to feel safe.
Oh, yes, hummingbirds hate everyone. But I love them, yeah. So that's April 27th. It's actually fairly late for my first hummingbird. The best first one of the year.
Fantastic.
Anyway,
well,
random stuff, Jackson Crawford.
That was fascinating. Thanks so much, Jackson. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's an honor to meet you for real.
You as well.
I mean, you've taken something that I guess I've been doing technically longer than you, and proven the principle of quality over quantity.
I don't know.
You have this.
I have a ton of stuff that's scattershot everywhere.
No, you have this down to an art.
Oh no, I don't. But thank you. That's very kind. We're both learning together separately, and
the disciple has exceeded the master.
Well, yeah, that's true, that you're having done this for years has been a constant inspiration to me, and as you probably all know, if you've been a fan of either this channel or Scorpio Martianos for a while, you'll see that where I've admired elements of the style of the hat, or being, and I lived in Arizona for a while, so like I'm going to do videos about Latin in front of cacti. I think that's good, and those were a lot of fun. But I'm glad you took them as they were meant to be, an homage to a truly inspirational channel and individual. So
you're too kind.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Can you give us a good salutation and give us your one in English, which I love, and what would you do in Norse for a goodbye?
I was just going to say all the best, but
what's a Norse one? I say goodbye in Latin.
I mean, the equivalent in Icelandic is bestu kveðjur.
Ooh.
Best greetings.
Bestu kveður?
Bestu kveðjur.
Bestu kveður.
Kveðjur.
Kveður.
Kveðjur.
Oh, he's going to teach me how to do that better later.
Bestu kveðjur. Yeah, best ways.
Walete.